What's going on, guys? This is a video of Star Wars Unlimited TCG, and we have here myself playing IG-88, a new very aggressive leader who can attack as an action, attack with a unit and give it +1 attack if you have more units than them. When he goes to his leader side, he's a 5/4, the most aggressive profile in the game, and gives your other friendly units raid 1. My opponent's using Han Solo. Action, put a card from your hand into play as a resource and ready it. At the start of the next action phase, defeat a resource you control. And when Han Solo deploys as a leader, he has a 4/6 profile, and he can put the top card of your deck into play as a resource and ready it. And at the start of the next action phase, defeat a resource you control. So both of those are resource acceleration. So when I saw these heroes, IG-88 looked very strong to me. Han, I wasn't really sure about. And so I had some relatively quick games here. I'm playing against His Dudeness. And we decided to play a few quick games and see how these new heroes looked. So we'll see whether or not my prediction was correct, and IG-88 will prove stronger than Han. Let's see how it goes. So this hand is a really weird hand. I have a lot of events. I have an Admiral Ozzel and a Tie, which are like both pretty legitimate early units. I also have Waylay, Shoot First, Surprise Strike, and Asteroid Sanctuary. So lots of tricks from the cunning aspect of my deck. Both of us are running the generic bases because Tarkin Town had not been previewed when this video was recorded. It is also with the old Tabletop Simulator mod configuration. But I told somebody that I was going to put this put this video out, so I am going to release it here. And I think many of my future videos are going to have the new Tabletop Simulator aesthetics, which are a little better. So yeah, I'm looking at my hand. This is a pretty solid hand. I have 2 1-drops, so I can play 2 cards on the first turn. And I have some have an Asteroid Sanctuary there as the potential trick. Could also potentially go for this Probe Droid overall, feeling pretty solid. So IG-88, you kind of want to be a swarm. My deck has a very low cost curve because I want to outnumber the opponent so that I can hit extra hard with his leader ability. My opponent leads off here with C-3PO. So C-3PO is actually a bit of an annoying card for me to see because the Death Star Stormtrooper I have in hand trades unfavorably with him. So I'm like, what should I do here? So one thing that I could do is I could play the Probe Droid. Another thing is I could do is play only the TIE Fighter. And I think I end up deciding I'm going to play the Probe Droid. I get to look at my opponent's hand, see what he's got there. So we have a copy of Sabine Wren, we have a Mace Windu, and we have an Open Fire. So Mace Windu is a powerful 7-cost unit with Ambush. When he attacks and defeats a unit, he readies up. Another relatively recent preview. Sabine is a fairly decent early unit, and then Open Fire, just a basic removal card. My opponent does take the initiative, and I'm like, okay, okay. So, little awkward for me with C-3PO and that Stormtrooper, and I actually draw 2 more events. So I have an Open Fire, a Surprise Strike. I decide to resource the Asteroid Sanctuary that I already have in hand. My opponent hits my base for 1 with C-3PO and fails his guess. So C-3PO, when played around attack, you choose a number, then look at the top card of your deck. If its cost is the chosen number, you reveal and draw that card. So my opponent has missed both his draws from C-3PO, luckily for me. I'm going to deploy a TIE Fighter. I now have more units than my opponent, so unless he deploys a unit or kills one of mine, I'll be able to use IG-88's ability to attack his base for 4 damage with my Probe Droid, but he actually removes the Probe Droid with an Open Fire. So now I could play my Death Star Trooper, and I actually do. I'm not altogether sure why I did that. I think that's a mistake because he can take the initiative and just kill him with C-3PO. It might have actually been better for me to just take the initiative there, unfortunately. The Death Star Trooper is I think it's a pretty good aggressive card, but it really does suffer against the Rebel droids. Actually, I'm starting to think actually that card might not be as good as I first thought with some of the later stuff that we're seeing because the Rebel droids and Sabine both counter the Death Star Trooper pretty strongly. And indeed, my opponent takes advantage of my potential blunder there and defeats the Death Star Trooper with C-3PO and draws a copy of Ezra at the same time. So not good for me. I hit his base for 2. And he plays out Ezra. I think I decide I want to remove Ezra with open fire. So Ezra is a 3-cost 3/4 that can, when he attacks, he looks at your top card and you can choose to leave it on top or discard it, but you can also actually choose to play it from the top of your deck. So if you do that, that's some card advantage. So my opponent uses Han's ability there to give him an extra resource, which he then uses to play Sabine. So basically, losing a card in hand in order to get that little more resource and get another unit on the board. And I'm really in trouble here, quite frankly. Looking at my hand, I have these small units, but my opponent sort of has the early board control. So in space, I'm doing okay, but my TIE fighter is going to get outpaced by Sabine and C-3PO. And on the ground, I don't have a lot going for me. If I play the Death Star Trooper, Sabine can kill the Death Star Trooper with her ability without taking any damage. If I play Ozzel, Sabine can kill Ozzel and take 2 damage. Like this is not really a very good situation. I end up deciding I'm going to resource Ozzel. My best option here might be to play the interceptor, or to this is the turn where IG-88 can deploy. He has a 5/4. So I do deploy him. And so 5/4, that's like a very strong aggressive profile. It gives my other friendly units raid 1. So that's something that I like to see on the board. And we're going to see if IG-88 can do a bunch of damage. I have to say, going into leaders deploying here, I am in a much worse spot than I'd like to be with an aggressive deck like this. My opponent has kind of won the opening here, and I'm at a disadvantage when it comes to the units that we see. So I think I decide that I'm going to have IG-88 try to get some of the board back under control. So I have IG-88 kill Sabine. My opponent used Han's ability to put an extra resource in play and now deploys Han. So Han can kill IG-88, but will take a lot of damage in doing so. I attack with the TIE Fighter for 3 damage. It has raid 1 thanks to IG-88's ability. And my opponent indeed attacks with Han, but he actually goes for the base, not for IG-88. So my base takes 4 damage. And then this is because he's setting up a play here, I believe, with Mace Windu. So what he's going to do here is he's going to play Mace Windu, have Mace take down IG-88, and then that actually stands Mace back up, and then Mace gets to hit my base for 5. Or no, I'm sorry, he actually that's what I was thinking was going to happen, but he actually uses the Han Solo unit to just kill IG-88 for free. I take the initiative, but it is not a good looking situation. C-3PO then kills my trooper, and has another draw. So I'm in a grim situation here already. This game is relatively young, but we are already in a state where the Grand Arena looks pretty lost. And yeah, so that's a not a good looking situation for me. So the problem also is this list doesn't really have like really big units that I can use to wrest back control of the Grand Arena. That Han Solo is just a huge obstacle to me. Han the unit that is, and so it's gonna be a big problem. And I don't really have good removal for him either, since this is an aggression deck. So with aggression, the problem with aggression's removal is that it's all damage based. So if the opponent has a lot of life, you're not going to be able to do enough damage. And I deploy my TIE Interceptor without a target, which I probably should have done earlier in the game, just to be pushing more damage through. My opponent hits my base heavily with Han. I deploy a Death Star Trooper. And he then sends in Mace Windu, kills the Death Star Trooper, and stands Mace back up. And I take the initiative. Mace hits my base for another 5, and looks like this one's going to be a loss. I don't really have much I can do. My air superiority in the space arena is able to hit his base for 6, but he has 3 very powerful units in the ground arena and can hit me for, I think, 15. So he actually has lethal on board. And I believe I just concede at this point because it is over. Yep, that's right. So first round for IG-88 against Han, big disappointment for IG-88, was not able to make much headway. into Han there. I felt like I sort of lost the I feel like I sort of lost the opening with my opponent gaining an advantage on the ground. And then even though I had the advantage in space, it wasn't that big. Then in the mid game, once the leaders came out, my opponent got a further advantage by killing IG-88 pretty easily with that Han Solo unit coming out. That's really one of the strengths of Han Solo, the leader, is that you get the ability to bring these units out early. Um, so Han deploys on 6 resources, but on 5 resources, you can use his ability to temporarily give yourself an extra resource, which means that he would deploy on what would otherwise be the 5 resource turn. Then, if you attack with him, you get a further resource, allowing you to deploy a 7 cost unit on the 5 resource turn, which is pretty big. Now, admittedly, those resources are temporary, but you do get a big swing from being able to get a powerful unit and play that early, and that's what we saw with my opponent getting that copy of Han Solo out early. Then in the next turn, my opponent got a Mace Windu out before he would otherwise be able to. So I play an Admiral Ozzel here. My opponent, so Ozzel can exhaust to play an Imperial unit ready and an Inner's play ready, which is just a nice little trick to potentially get a bigger unit going faster. The problem is that he also lets your opponent ready a unit, which means that it's usually something that's only going to be that relevant if you have the initiative. Okay, so my opponent has Sabine, I have Ozzel, but the good news is I have a Snowtrooper Lieutenant here, which I can potentially use to have Ozzel just take down Sabine with an attack. Sabine 2/3 under certain circumstances can't be attacked, and on attack can deal 1 damage to the defender or a base. I play my Snowtrooper Lieutenant, 2 cost 2/2, allows a friendly Imperial unit to attack with +2. You may attack with the unit if it's an Imperial unit gets +2/+0, so that allows Ozzel to take down Sabine. My opponent plays Ezra. I then play a Death Star Trooper. So this is more like what I'm thinking with respect to getting that early game ground force set up, outnumbering the opponent. Sorry for sniffing there, little guys. I'm coming off a cold here. And so we're resourcing up for round 2. Already, though, this opening is something that I'm a lot more excited about than my previous one. Okay, so my opponent does have the initiative this turn, which means he is going to get the chance to attack with Ezra and kill one of my units probably, and then also look at the top card of the deck, and he can choose to play it, or he could put it back on top, or he could actually discard it. So we'll see what happens with that. I think it's very likely that an attack with Ezra will lead off the turn, though. I do have this open fire in hand, so if he doesn't attack with Ezra, I have some options, but he indeed has Ezra defeat my Death Star Stormtrooper, looks at his top card. And ends up deciding to put it back on top. Okay. Could be a lot worse for me, I figure. Could be a lot worse for me. I would have liked to just play open fire, kill Ezra, and then swing hard against the enemy base with my 3 units, but as my opponent had the initiative, that was not really an option. He actually decides to discard the card, and we see that it was an Ozatuk Liberator gunship, I believe. So maybe he's just thought, you know what, this guy doesn't have any presence in space. The key issue right now is going to be taking control of the ground arena instead. I decided to have my Snowtrooper Lieutenant trade with Ezra. The reason that I used the Snowtrooper Lieutenant and not Ozzel, even though Ozzel has only 1 HP and the Snowtrooper Lieutenant had 2, is that Ozzel's ability might come in handy. My opponent plays C-3PO. I have some stuff that I can play myself, though. I can play the TIE Fighter, and then I can play either Boba Fett, or I can use Open Fire to kill his C-3PO. However, he still has 2 resources, so there may be some options on the other side of the board, and we see Leia Princess Leia, or Leia Organa Defiant Princess, and her ability is used to exhaust my Ozzel. I then play Boba Fett. Boba Fett Disintegrator, powerful unit, 3 cost 3/5, and deals bonus damage on it or on attack. He deals damage if he attacked a unit that is exhausted and that has and was not just played this turn. I now have a forced choke, which is like an okay removal thing that I end up deciding, I'm going to resource that. This is the turn when IG-88 comes out. I do have an open fire. I do have a cell block guard there to put up some defense. C-3PO defeats Ozzel, guessing 3 and drawing a copy of Ezra Bridger. Boba could defeat Leia here, or could actually defeat C-3PO as well. The cell block guard could put up an obstacle. I could deploy IG-88. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like I have a method to actually defeat Han this turn, but without him getting a chance to attack, unless he lets me hit him and then I play open fire on him or something. I think one thing that might be important with Han is stopping him before he gets his ability to go off, so that they can't play potentially a 7 cost. So they can always use his leader part of the ability, but if you can kill him or exhaust him before he attacks when he first deploys, you can then prevent the second part, which if they're trying to combo both of them together to get a 7 cost unit out, could be a big negative swing for them. So I'm going to use IG-88's ability here to allow my so Boba swung and defeated Leia. He used Han's ability. I used my IG-88's ability to have my TIE Fighter hit the enemy base at +1 strength. Han Solo's on the field 4/6. When he attacks, he will be able to. When he attacks, he'll be able to resource the top card of his deck, even if it's only temporary. I play the cell block guard to just kind of be a barrier in Han's way. Han defeats the cell block guard as I'm expecting. I deploy IG-88, I believe, here. And IG-88 immediately gets killed by Mace Windu without getting a chance to attack. RIP. Not IG-88's finest hour. I take the initiative, and Mace Windu then trades with Boba. So overall, though, this situation's not quite as bad as it might look, because as my opponent has to do now, 2 of those resources need to be discarded, and I can play this open fire to kill Han before he gets the chance to use his ability this turn, since I do have the initiative. So could be worse. On the other hand, my board presence is 1 TIE Fighter. That is not really what you want to see, especially with this deck that really wants to outnumber the opponent. So I think I'm mulling over my resources. I end up not resourcing. My plan is to kill Han, which I do, plan out that open fire. Then I'm going to play the Viper probe droid, I believe, and I will have my TIE Fighter continue strafing the enemy base. I am ahead on life right now, but the problem is, this deck, I was hoping that I would be getting an advantage much earlier in the game, and I haven't been able to do that. I look at my opponent's hand and I see he has Han the unit, which he can't play this turn, a rogue operative, and I forget what this card is called, asteroid sanctuary to exhaust and shield. I use IG-88's ability there, but it doesn't actually do bonus damage because I forgot that my opponent had just played another unit, putting us at 2 units to 2 units. So no bonus damage from IG-88. The funny thing is I am actually winning on base HP, but the problem is that I'm winning on base HP by a small amount, and my opponent has a card advantage, and my opponent has a deck with more late game cards. So I am really in a spot of trouble here. General Veers is a nice card. Surprise Strike is a nice card. The Asteroid Sanctuary is not bad, but it's going to be tough because my opponent has that Han Solo coming out here. And it's going to be a big problem for me. Yep, there's Han Solo, takes down my Viper Probe Droid. So now the ground arena, once again, is firmly in my opponent's control. I do have the Space Arena advantage, but, with a single TIE Fighter, I play out my Asteroid Sanctuary to exhaust my opponent's Rogue Operative, preventing him from hitting my base for 4. He attacks with C-3PO, guesses 3, and gets a Wing Leader, not what I want to see. I play General Veers, who will at least allow my TIE Fighter to attack for 3 again this turn. But my opponent has the initiative. Veers is going to just get killed. This is looking really grim. This deck is not well poised to deal with things like that. This deck that I'm running is not well poised to deal with things like that Han Solo. So I'm really in a bit of trouble here, quite frankly. Game two, maybe looking a little bit better for IG-88. The early game was better, but once again, it does seem that those 7 cost units, Han Solo and Mace Windu, have caused some big problems for this build, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make my way out of it. My opponent this time spends 7. Mace Windu arrives. I was just talking about him giving me trouble earlier, and now he's back again, takes down General Veers, and stands back up. Very strong unit. So 7 cost 5/7. When this defeats a unit, you may ready it. So basically, if the opponent has a lot of smaller units that you can repeatedly take out, you can keep standing up and keep hitting more units or hit the enemy base after a certain point. And I said, you know what? Let's just go to game 3. We can call it there. It seemed very doomed there. I just saw no hope of regaining control of the ground. So we're going to try one more and we're going to see what we can do. It's been a tough one. It's been a tough one. All right, so I'm going for the 2 1-cost unit beginning here, throwing out the TIE Fighter there, the TIE LN. Just a 2/1 in the Space Arena. In the previous games, these Humble TIE LNs, very cool art on that card, by the way. I really like the art. I know it's like a basic card, but I think it looks cool, very cool. But the Humble TIE LN has been maybe one of my star players in these games, which is kind of sad, kind of telling you that I'm maybe not doing so hot with this when the TIE LN is doing some of the best of your stuff. But my opponent plays a R2D2, and I end up deciding I'm going to take the initiative instead of deploying that Stormtrooper who R2D2 will just kill. It's not worth it. Instead, I'm going to deploy General Veers, who will buff my TIE Fighter. So 3 cost 3/3, other friendly Imperial units get +1/+1. So now my TIE is a 3/2, and I could use IG-88's ability to actually make him do 4 damage. But now I can't because my opponent played an extra card. So I do, however, get to swing in there for 3. My opponent plays Sabine and ends up deciding to take the initiative rather than attacking me with R2. The Death Star Stormtrooper is a card that I thought was super cool at first, but I'm starting to see some problems with, at least when it comes to dealing with the heroic droids in the early game. Now, to be fair, it gets a lot better with Tarkin, where you could play it, and then if the opponent plays R2D2 or C-3PO, you can use Tarkin's ability, give an experience token to the Death Star Stormtrooper, and then you have a 4/2 who will defeat one of those droids and stay alive. Very different situation. Sabine trades with Veers on my opponent's first action. I decide to play the Starwing Scout, a 4/1 unit in the Space Arena. And if it's defeated while you have the initiative, then you get to draw 2 cards. My opponent plays Ezra Bridger. I erroneously use IG-88's ability to try and attack at +1, but I can't because my opponent just played a unit. As you can see, I'm not exactly a super experienced player with IG-88, still kind of learning the ropes. And in this situation, my opponent is again going to just take the initiative rather than attacking with R2. Now, I could play the Death Star Stormtrooper here to get another unit out on the board. But because he would be defeated so easily and my opponent has the initiative, that might not be the best move. I'm mulling over whether or not to do it. On the other hand, it would take an action for him to actually kill it, and it would at least damage his stuff. So I decide, you know what? We'll send him in there. But it's funny, I think we have to kind of come back and reevaluate some cards as the we have to kind of come back and reevaluate some cards as the set progresses. And unfortunately, I think the Death Star Stormtrooper is one of those cards that looked really awesome at first, but it's maybe not as good as he seemed, although Tarkin does make him better. The number of times that he just ends up not even trading, just getting killed is pretty high when you look at R2D2, C3PO, and Sabine Wren, all of which are quite good cards. All of those can kill him without actually dying themselves. So there are some pretty unfavorable trades in the early game, at least when he has to play into a heroic opponent. Against villainous opponents, I do think he's better, although you do have the risk then of getting pinged off by Vader. I think Thork was talking to me about this, and I was skeptical at first, but I'm starting to come around on that Death Star Stormtrooper. Maybe not being as good. I do think with Tarkin and with Vader, he's better because with Vader playing the Death Star Stormtrooper gives you your leader ability, and with Tarkin you can give him the experience and get him out of range of the one damage pings. But yeah, I do think maybe not quite as good as I had thought at first glance. All right, so this time my space fleet's pretty nice now, actually, with two ties and a Starwing Scout. My opponent indeed used R2 to take down that Death Star Trooper. I also have a nice little surprise here, which is that if my opponent sends in Han, and my opponent can potentially bring out Han, I can bring out IG-88, and I actually have a shoot first, which will allow IG-88 to attack and kill Han in one attack, which could be what I need to prevent Han from getting his ability going. My opponent uses Asteroid Sanctuary to exhaust my Starwing Scout and put a shield on Ezra. At this point, I could use IG-88's ability to have my remaining non-exhausted TIE fighter swing in and hit the enemy base for 3 damage. If I deploy IG-88, he would also give it +1 attack by a different method by having raid. I play my own Asteroid Sanctuary, exhausting Ezra and giving a shield to the Starwing Scout. I would not like to have that removed. It is a 4-1 in the space arena, which is actually pretty good. And I can potentially do a bunch of swings into the enemy base there. So the shield there is hopefully going to keep me in the business. My opponent uses Han's ability. I use IG-88's ability. Han deployed, and there's the shoot first from me. Attack with the unit gets +1/+0 for this attack and deals its combat damage before the defender. So IG-88 takes down Han without Han getting a chance to reply. My opponent then does clear my tie there thanks to his Alzatuk Liberator gunship coming in with ambush. So I didn't get the chance to do the bonus damage with that tie. So on the ground, I have my boy IG-88. In space, I have a shielded Starwing and a basic tie. I've drawn a probe droid and an asteroid sanctuary. I end up deciding to asteroid sanctuary. I exhaust Ezra and give a shield to my other unit in space. So now both my space units are shielded, and my opponent's gunship has only unfavorable situations. My opponent uses Han's ability to put an extra resource. That's a key sign that he's going to have a 7 cost. Knowing that he was going to have Mace Windu or Han Solo, I swing IG-88 into his base for 5 before IG-88 can be killed. Mace Windu indeed shows up, takes down IG-88. I use my shielded TIE fighter to defeat his Liberator gunship. Mace Windu hits my base for 5. I hit his base for 4 with my Starwing Scout. I still have a probe droid in hand, and my opponent has R2D2 still in play. He takes the initiative rather than swing with R2D2, and the question now is, do I want to play the probe droid? He will get to reveal my opponent's 0 cards in hand, so that part is useless. But it will be an extra body, and will probably at least make the opponent spend an attack on him. Unfortunately, this probe droid is not so awesome at this point in the game, and I do think this deck probably went a little bit too hard on the small units. I was sort of thinking that I wanted to have a lot of small units to outnumber my opponent and get IG-88's leader ability going. But as we're seeing here, these games are getting later than I was first thinking. I was hoping to try to close things out fast before the bigger units came out. At least in this matchup, it didn't seem like I was really able to do that, so I'm starting to think it might have been better to have some bigger targets. Ezra takes out the probe droid, not even taking any damage thanks to his shield. My opponent looks at the top card, decides to play it. It is Leia Defiant Princess, who exhausts my Star Wing Scout. Not what I want to see. I can hit his base for 2. I'm going to Asteroid Sanctuary, exhaust Mace Windu, shield the tie. Once again, I have a entirely shielded Space Force, but I don't know that that's going to be enough. My opponent spends 3 resources for something. What will it be? Oh, I think he was actually just paying for no, okay. He plays a wing leader and gives 2 experience tokens to he's thinking about different targets for it, but ends up deciding on Ezra. All I have in hand is a First Legion Snowtrooper, another one of those small units that I think is not going to do a ton of good. I have my tie just swing for his base. So I do have a substantial life lead. And so my shielded space units don't care that much about what he's doing. Maybe I'm going to be able to push my life lead enough that it will get me into it will allow my space units to close out the game. So in theory, this turn I can do 6 damage if he clears neither of my space units. And then next turn I might actually have lethal if he doesn't clear those space units and I have a Snowtrooper Lieutenant to push the tie-in for bonus damage. Additionally, I could draw like a surprise strike, something like that, that would allow me to push damage even further. So even though my opponent's force is a lot better than mine right now, it's by no means over. My opponent clears my Snowtrooper Lieutenant, and then unfortunately Ezra's ability hits a waylay on the top of the deck, allowing him to send the Starwing Scout back to hand as well, which is a very grim development for me and puts things in a much more negative context than I'd first thought. I'm going to open fire to defeat Mace Windu. That at least saves me from 5 damage coming in there. My opponent has his wing leader attack into my TIE fighter shields. My TIE fighter hits his base for 2, dropping him to 12 life. Han Solo's ability used again for a temporary resource. I deploy a stormtrooper. Can at least trade with one of those units, maybe. My opponent plays another Liberator gunship, defeating my TIE fighter, and I take the initiative. So my space advantage has now been removed. And after taking the initiative, my opponent then trades R2 for the trooper that I deployed. I do see a card that I'm very happy to see here, the Imperial Interceptor. That will allow me to take down the take down that gunship and regain the advantage in space. But my opponent does have that ground advantage, and so Ezra hits me, and then his top deck reveals a rogue operative, which my opponent then plays, not what I want to see. He then plays another rogue operative. This is very bad for me. My opponent has 15 damage on the board. I do have some removal with a copy of Waylay as well as a Forced Choke that could get me some damage, get some of his units off the board, and hopefully buy me some time. But the life totals are getting closer, and it's not looking great. This is definitely a closer game than the previous ones, I think, but I do still feel that I'm not in a very advantageous position. In fact, despite having the life lead and having the space arena, my opponent's ground force is just so strong that I don't think my space force is likely going to be able to close things out. If he hadn't had that waylay for my Starwing Scout last turn, it might be a different story, but having that get sent back to hand was not what I wanted to see. I'm going to lead off with a Force Choke to defeat Ezra. I really don't want my opponent getting another top deck that he can actually just play. In the late game, Ezra's ability gets really strong. An ambush Liberator gunship arrives, ambushing and destroying my Interceptor. I do bring out the Starwing Scout, but I'm about to take 10 damage. And yeah, heavy damage there. And my opponent also plays Sabine. So my opponent now has lethal on the ground. And it is not looking like anything I draw here is going to save the day. So it is going to be, I believe, another loss here for IG-88. So really an interesting set of games because, my preconceptions about this matchup or about these leaders was definitely wrong. I thought, IG-88, he's looking really strong. With IG-88, that's gonna be the like aggressive, powerful leader, whereas Han looks kind of clunky. I don't know. Like, yeah, you get that temporary acceleration, but then you have to discard the card, so it's card disadvantage to use as later ability. Like, I don't know that it's worth it, but at least in these games, it's been very worth it. And Han has been doing very well, whereas I felt like with IG-88, I've really been kind of floundering. So it's been an interesting set and kind of goes to show that sometimes your first impressions, or at least my first impressions of how good cards are going to be, might well be wrong. Now, am I saying IG-88 is a bad leader? No, no. It's very possible there's a good composition with IG-88 that I haven't seen yet. It's very possible that people are going to figure something out, that I'm not playing him right, that there's some way to get a ton of value out of this leader in through some other play style that I haven't considered here. But it does seem to me that the leader that I thought was going to be like pretty powerful and straightforward, IG-88, is a lot weaker than I'd first figured. Whereas the leader that I thought was going to be like sort of complicated and weird, Han, was more straightforwardly effective. So yeah, interesting situation. But ultimately one where my predictions were disproven. So yeah, that's gonna do it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed those games between Han Solo and IG-88, and I will catch you guys later.